The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine courtyard of Whitmore Preparatory Academy, where students in pressed uniforms gathered in exclusive clusters. The Gothic architecture spoke of old money and older traditions, its stone walls holding secrets that had protected certain families for generations. Marcus Williams adjusted his new uniform tie, the crisp fabric feeling foreign against his skin. At 17, he stood tall and lean, his dark eyes taking in every detail of his surroundings with the quiet alertness of someone who had learned to read rooms quickly. His backpack hung loosely on his shoulder, containing the usual school supplies plus a worn notebook filled with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques he'd been studying since childhood. The scholarship letter had arrived 3 months ago, offering him a full ride to one of the most prestigious prep schools in the state. His mother had cried when she read it, knowing it meant opportunities neither of them had dared to dream of. What she hadn't known was that Marcus had spent the summer training twice as hard at his local BJJ gym, preparing not just academically, but physically, for whatever challenges awaited him. He walked through the main entrance, noting how conversations seemed to pause as he passed. The whispers followed him down the marble hallway, punctuated by the sound of expensive shoes on polished floors. Marcus had expected this. He'd been one of only a handful of black students at his previous school, but Whitmore was different. Here, he could count the students who looked like him on one hand. "Lost? Scholarship boy?" The voice came from behind him, dripping with practiced condescension. Marcus turned to see 3 students blocking his path. The leader was a tall blond boy with sharp features and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His uniform was tailored perfectly, and a gold watch caught the light on his wrist. The name tag read, "Preston Blackwood III. "Just finding my way around," Marcus replied evenly, his voice carrying the calm confidence his BJJ instructor had taught him. First day and all. Preston's friends flanked him, both wearing the same entitled smirk. The one on the left was stockier, with the build of someone who had relied on size rather than skill his whole life. The other was thinner but had cruel eyes that seemed to enjoy the discomfort of others. "Well, let me help you find your way," Preston said, stepping closer. "You see, we have traditions here, standards, and when someone different joins our community, we like to make sure they understand their place." Marcus felt his muscles tense slightly, the way they did before a sparring match. But this wasn't the controlled environment of his gym. This was something else entirely. "I'm just here to learn," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady. "Same as everyone else?" Preston laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Same as everyone else? Look around, scholarship boy. Does this look like everyone else's world to you?" The hallway had grown quieter, other students slowing their pace to watch the interaction. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, some curious, others uncomfortable, but none moving to intervene. "My name is Marcus," he said firmly, "and I have as much right to be here as anyone." "Rights." Preston's voice rose slightly. "Your rights are what we say they are, and right now I'm saying you need to learn some respect." Before Marcus could respond, Preston's hand shot out, shoving him hard in the chest. Marcus stumbled backward, his backpack sliding off his shoulder and hitting the floor with a thud. The sound echoed through the hallway, and several students gasped. Marcus looked down at his scattered belongings, then back up at Preston. Every instinct he'd developed over years of training told him to respond, to use his body the way he'd been taught. But another voice, his mother's voice, reminded him of what was at stake. One wrong move, one moment of losing control, and everything they'd worked for could disappear. "Pick it up," Preston commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged. "And while you're down there, maybe you'll remember where you belong." Marcus knelt slowly, gathering his books and papers. His BJJ notebook had fallen open, revealing detailed diagrams of submission holds and escape techniques. Preston's friend noticed it and kicked it away before Marcus could grab it. "What's this?" the stocky boy asked, picking up the notebook. "Some kind of karate stuff?" "It's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu," Marcus said quietly, reaching for the notebook. Preston snatched it away, flipping through the pages with mock interest. "Oh, so our scholarship boy thinks he's some kind of fighter. How cute." He held the notebook high, just out of Marcus's reach. "Maybe we should see how tough you really are." The late bell rang and Preston tossed the notebook back to Marcus with deliberate casualness. "Welcome to Whitmore, scholarship boy. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of fun together." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus collected his things and headed to his first class. The notebook's pages were crumpled, but the techniques inside remained clear. He'd need them more than he'd initially thought. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The next few weeks fell into a predictable pattern. Marcus excelled in his classes, his teachers noting his sharp mind and dedication. But outside the classroom, Preston and his friends made sure he understood his place in the social hierarchy. They would bump into him in the hallways, knock books from his hands, and make loud comments about diversity initiatives whenever he passed. Marcus endured it all with quiet dignity, focusing on his studies and the techniques he practiced alone in his room each night. He'd found a small gymnasium in the basement of the school, officially closed for renovations but accessible through a side door that didn't quite latch properly. There, surrounded by old equipment and dusty mats, he would run through his forms and conditioning exercises. It was during one of these solitary training sessions that he first encountered Emma Chen, a junior with sharp intelligence and a camera always hanging around her neck. She was documenting the school's architecture for the yearbook when she discovered Marcus's makeshift dojo. "Sorry," she said, lowering her camera. "I didn't know anyone was using this space." Marcus paused mid-technique, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's okay. I was just finishing up." Emma watched him for a moment, noting the fluid precision of his movements. "That's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, isn't it? My cousin trains in San Francisco." "Yeah," Marcus said, surprised by her knowledge. "You know BJJ?" "A little, enough to recognize technique when I see it." She gestured to his form. "You're good, really good." "How long have you been training?" "Since I was 8, Marcus replied, toweling off. "My mom wanted me to have discipline. She probably didn't expect me to need it for self-defense." Emma's expression grew serious. "Preston and his crew?" Marcus nodded. "They've made it clear I'm not welcome here. They do that to anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable," Emma said. "The difference is you could probably handle all 3 of them without breaking a sweat." "That's not the point," Marcus said, shouldering his bag. "I'm here on scholarship. One incident, one complaint from the right family, and I'm gone. My mom sacrificed everything for this opportunity." Emma studied him with journalist's eyes. "What if I told you there might be another way?" "What do you mean?" "I mean Preston and his friends aren't as untouchable as they think. They've been getting away with harassment for years because no one's been brave enough to document it. But you're different. You have skills they don't know about." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not looking for a fight. I'm not talking about starting one," Emma said. "I'm talking about finishing one. When they escalate, which they will, you'll be ready. And I'll be there to make sure the truth comes out." The next day brought a new level of humiliation. Marcus was eating lunch alone in the cafeteria when Preston approached with his usual entourage and several new faces, including students he didn't recognize. "Well, well," Preston announced loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "If it isn't our resident martial artist. I've been telling everyone about your little notebook." Marcus looked up from his textbook, noting the growing audience. "I'm just trying to eat my lunch." "Oh, but lunch is so much more enjoyable with entertainment," Preston said, gesturing to his friends. "Chad here is on the wrestling team. He's curious about how your, what was it, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu compares to real fighting." The stocky boy named Chad stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "I've been wrestling since middle school. Won state twice. I'd love to see what this kung fu stuff is all about." "It's not kung fu," Marcus said quietly, "and I'm not interested in demonstrating." Preston's voice took on a mocking tone. "Aw, come on, don't be shy. I thought martial arts were supposed to make you confident. Or is it just for show?" The cafeteria had grown noticeably quieter, students at nearby tables turning to watch the confrontation. Marcus could feel the weight of their stares, the anticipation of violence that seemed to hang in the air. "I said I'm not interested," Marcus repeated, closing his textbook. "Maybe he's scared," suggested the third member of Preston's crew. "All that training, but when it comes to the real thing—" "I'm not scared," Marcus said, standing up. "I'm trying to be smart." Preston stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that still carried to the surrounding tables. "Smart? Is that what you call it when you let people walk all over you? When you don't fight back? That's not smart, scholarship boy. That's being a coward." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a flash of the anger he'd been suppressing for weeks. His hands flexed involuntarily, muscle memory from thousands of hours of training threatening to take over. "There's a difference between being a coward and knowing when to pick your battles," he said, gathering his things. The only battle here is whether you're going to keep pretending to be something you're not, Preston said, raising his voice again. Everyone here knows you don't belong. The question is, are you going to keep embarrassing yourself, or are you going to face reality? Marcus stood slowly, his lunch tray in his hands. For a moment, the cafeteria was completely silent. Then, with deliberate calm, he walked to the trash can and disposed of his barely touched meal. "This isn't over," Preston called after him. "You can't run forever. If you're enjoying this story of courage and standing up to bullies, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you would do in this situation." That afternoon, Marcus found himself in the basement gymnasium again, working through techniques with unusual intensity. His movements were sharp, precise, tinged with the frustration he couldn't express anywhere else. He was so focused that he didn't notice the door opening until Emma's voice cut through his concentration. "Rough day?" Marcus paused, breathing heavily. "You could say that." "I heard about lunch," Emma said, setting down her camera bag. "Half the school's talking about it." "Great," Marcus muttered. "Just what I needed." "Actually, it might be exactly what you needed," Emma said. "Preston's getting bolder, more public. That means he's getting sloppy." Marcus looked at her skeptically. "Sloppy how?" "He's starting to believe his own hype. Thinks he's untouchable because he's gotten away with it for so long. But the more public he gets, the harder it becomes to cover up." "Cover up what?" "He's not breaking any laws. He's just being a bully." "Is he, though?" Emma pulled out her phone, showing Marcus a video she'd recorded. "Look at this footage from lunch, really look." Marcus watched the screen, seeing himself from Emma's perspective. What struck him wasn't Preston's words, but the reactions of the other students. Some looked uncomfortable, others excited by the potential for violence. But there was something else. Something in the way the faculty members in the background seemed to deliberately avoid looking in their direction. "They knew," Marcus said quietly. "The teachers, the administrators, they knew what was happening and chose not to intervene." "Now you're getting it," Emma said. "This isn't just about Preston being a bully. It's about a system that protects him and hangs you out to dry." "But systems can be changed if you have the right evidence." Marcus handed back the phone. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we document everything, build a case, and when Preston finally pushes too far, which he will, we'll be ready to show the world exactly what kind of place Whitmore Preparatory Academy really is." The escalation came sooner than either of them expected. 2 days later, Marcus was walking to his car after school when he found all 4 tires slashed. The cuts were clean, deliberate, made with something sharp enough to ensure the tires were completely unusable. A note was tucked under his windshield wiper. "Maybe now you'll learn to take the bus with the other scholarship kids. Your friends." Marcus stared at the damage, calculating the cost of replacement tires against his mother's tight budget. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Don't do anything rash. Meet me in the gym at 6. By the time he reached the basement gymnasium, Marcus had worked through his initial anger and arrived at something colder, more focused. Emma was waiting with her camera and laptop, along with someone Marcus didn't recognize. "Marcus, this is Mr. Rivera," Emma said. "He teaches at the community college downtown, but he also runs a self-defense program for at-risk youth. He's been following your situation." Mr. Rivera was a compact man in his 50s, with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. When he shook Marcus's hand, his grip was firm and knowing. "Emma tells me you've been training BJJ since you were young," Mr. Rivera said. "Who was your instructor?" "Professor Santos at Team Unity," Marcus replied. "He's been like a father to me." Mr. Rivera nodded approvingly. "Good school, traditional approach. But Professor Santos taught you more than just technique, didn't he?" "He taught me that real strength comes from control," Marcus said. "That the best fight is the one you don't have to fight." "Wise words," Mr. Rivera said. "But sometimes, despite our best efforts, fights find us anyway. The question is, are we prepared not just to defend ourselves, but to defend the principles we believe in?" Marcus looked between Emma and Mr. Rivera, sensing this was about more than just his personal situation with Preston. "What are you both trying to tell me?" Emma opened her laptop, showing Marcus a series of videos and documents. "What I'm trying to tell you is that Preston and his friends have been doing this for years. Different victims, same pattern. And every time the school has covered it up or found ways to blame the victims." The screen showed incident reports, disciplinary records, and transfer requests. Marcus saw names of students who had left Whitmore suddenly, often with vague explanations about better fits or family decisions. "This is bigger than just me," Marcus said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Much bigger," Mr. Rivera confirmed. "And that's why we need someone with your particular combination of skills and integrity to help us document what's really happening here." Marcus looked at the evidence, then back at the two people who had become his unlikely allies. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We're asking you to be yourself," Emma said. "To stay true to your principles, but also to be ready when the time comes. Preston is escalating because he thinks he's cornered you. But what he doesn't realize is that every escalation is another piece of evidence." "And when he finally goes too far?" Marcus asked. Mr. Rivera smiled grimly. "When he finally goes too far, you'll be ready. Not just to defend yourself, but to make sure the whole world sees exactly what kind of person he really is." The next morning brought a new level of harassment. Marcus arrived at school to find his locker had been broken into, his textbooks scattered and damaged. Worse, someone had written racial slurs across his locker door in permanent marker. As he stood there, staring at the hateful words, a crowd began to gather. Some students looked genuinely shocked, others seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. But what struck Marcus most was the reaction of the faculty members who passed by. They saw the vandalism, registered the crowd, and kept walking. "Terrible shame," came Preston's voice from behind him. "Someone really should teach people to respect other people's property." Marcus turned to see Preston approaching with his usual entourage, all of them wearing expressions of mock concern. "Of course, when you don't really belong somewhere, I suppose it's easy to make enemies," Preston continued. "Maybe this is the universe's way of telling you something." "The only thing this tells me," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest, "is that some people are cowards who can't face someone directly." Preston's expression darkened. "Careful, scholarship boy. You're starting to sound like you think you're better than everyone else." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Marcus replied, "but I know I'm better than this." He gestured to the defaced locker, and Preston's friends laughed as if they'd heard the funniest joke in the world. "Better than this?" Preston stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You want to know what better than this looks like? It looks like knowing your place. It looks like understanding that some people matter and others don't. And right now, you're firmly in the second category." Marcus felt the familiar tension in his muscles, the way his body prepared for conflict even as his mind counseled restraint. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said quietly, "and I'm not backing down." Preston's smile turned predatory. "We'll see about that." The harassment escalated daily after the locker incident. Marcus would find his homework assignments missing from his desk, his lunch money stolen from his bag, and his path blocked by Preston's growing circle of followers. Each incident was calculated to be just below the threshold of what might trigger official intervention, but collectively they created an atmosphere of constant intimidation. Marcus maintained his disciplined routine, arriving early to train in the basement gymnasium and staying late to avoid the crowds. But even these sanctuaries weren't safe. One evening, he arrived to find the small space vandalized, his makeshift training area destroyed and equipment scattered. Emma was waiting for him, her camera documenting the damage. "They're getting desperate," she said. "This isn't random harassment anymore. They're trying to break you." "They're succeeding," Marcus admitted, looking at the destruction. "I'm starting to wonder if this is worth it." "That's exactly what they want you to think," came a new voice from the doorway. Marcus turned to see an elderly black man in a custodian's uniform, his presence commanding despite his humble position. The man moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate hostile environments with grace. "Mr. Washington," Emma said respectfully, "I was hoping you'd come." "Been watching this young man for weeks, Mr. Washington said, his eyes taking in Marcus with the assessment of someone who had seen many battles. "Reminds me of myself at that age. Same pride, same discipline, same burden." "I'm sorry, but who are you?" Marcus asked. "Name's Jerome Washington. Been cleaning these halls for 32 years. Before that, I was a Marine. Before that, I was a young black man trying to make his way in a world that didn't want me to succeed." "Mr. Enon." Washington began picking up the scattered equipment, his movements deliberate and respectful. "You know what I learned in all those years? That the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone else define your worth. And right now, that's exactly what you're doing. Marcus helped gather the damaged training gear. I'm just trying to survive until graduation. Survival isn't living, Mr. Washington said firmly. And from what I've seen, you've got the tools to do more than just survive. You've got the skills to change things. Skills? Marcus looked at the destruction around them. What good are my skills if I can't even protect my own training space? Mr. Washington straightened, his bearing shifting from custodian to the Marine he had once been. Son, I've been watching you train. I've seen your discipline, your technique, your heart. But more importantly, I've seen your restraint. You know what real strength looks like. Then why does it feel like I'm losing? Because you're fighting the wrong battle, Mr. Washington said. You're so focused on not becoming what they want you to be that you've forgotten who you actually are. Emma looked up from her camera. What do you mean? I mean, Mr. Washington said, settling onto a bench, that every great fighter knows there's a time to absorb punishment and a time to strike back. This young man has been absorbing punishment for months. The question is, does he know when it's time to defend himself? Marcus sat across from him, studying the older man's face. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that sometimes the system doesn't change until it's forced to change. And sometimes that force has to come from people who are willing to stand up and say, enough. Mr. Washington reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. These open every door in this school. Been carrying them for 3 decades. You know what I've learned? The most important rooms are the ones they don't want you to see. What rooms? Emma asked, her journalist instincts sharpening. The ones where they keep the records. The documentation of all the complaints that were filed and ignored. The evidence of all the students who were pushed out instead of protected. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a recognition that this was bigger than just his personal struggle. You're talking about exposing a cover-up. I'm talking about exposing the truth, Mr. Washington said. But it's going to take courage, and it's going to take someone with your particular combination of skills to pull it off. That night, Marcus called his mother. She listened as he described the harassment, the vandalism, and the growing pressure he felt to either fight back or give up. Baby, she said when he finished, I didn't sacrifice everything so you could be safe. I sacrificed everything so you could be free. There's a difference. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I lose the scholarship? Then we'll figure something else out, she said firmly. But what we won't do is let anyone make you feel like you don't belong somewhere you've earned the right to be. I'm scared, Mom. Good, she said. Scared means you understand what's at stake. But don't let scared turn into paralyzed. You've got tools, baby. Use them. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Marcus arrived at school to find police cars in the parking lot and an ambulance pulling away. Emma found him before first period, her face pale with urgency. It's David Chen, she said. He's in the hospital. Marcus knew David, a quiet sophomore who had been one of Preston's recent targets. What happened? They say he fell down the stairs, but the injuries don't match. And there were witnesses who saw Preston and his friends near the stairwell right before it happened. Are you saying they pushed him? I'm saying David is in intensive care with a broken arm and a concussion, and the school is already calling it an accident before any investigation has happened. Marcus felt his blood run cold. They're covering it up. They're trying to, but this time they went too far. David's parents are asking questions. The media is starting to pay attention, and I have video footage that contradicts the official story. What kind of footage? Emma pulled out her camera, showing Marcus a clip she'd taken while documenting the school's architecture. In the background, barely visible, was the stairwell where David had been found. The timestamp showed it was taken just minutes before the incident. Look at the corner of the frame, Emma said. You can see Preston and Chad arguing with someone. And if you look carefully, you can see David backing away from them. Marcus studied the video, his trained eye picking out details that proved this was no accident. We need to get this to the police. We need to get this to the right people, Emma corrected. Because if we just hand it over to the local authorities, there's no guarantee it won't disappear like all the other evidence. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we build an ironclad case, video evidence, witness testimony, documented pattern of harassment, and we make sure it all comes out at once. Too big and too public to cover up. Marcus looked at the video again, seeing David's frightened face in the final frame. What do you need me to do? I need you to be ready for what's coming next. Because when this footage goes public, Preston and his friends are going to know exactly who's behind it, and they're going to come for you with everything they've got. The opportunity came 3 days later. Marcus was leaving the library when he found Preston and his entire crew waiting for him in the parking lot. But this time was different. This time they weren't hiding behind plausible deniability. "Scholarship boy," Preston called out, his voice carrying a new edge of desperation. "Heard you've been asking questions about David Chen. That's not very smart." Marcus kept walking, but the group spread out to block his path. He counted 6 of them, including Chad and 2 new faces he didn't recognize. "I'm just trying to get to my car," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through his system. "Oh, but we're not done talking," Preston said, stepping closer. "You see, some people have been spreading rumors, nasty rumors about good families, and we think those rumors are coming from you." "I don't spread rumors," Marcus replied. "I deal in facts." "Facts?" Preston laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The only fact here is that you're about to learn what happens to people who don't know when to keep their mouths shut." Marcus shifted his weight slightly, his body automatically moving into a defensive stance. Years of training had taught him to read the signs of impending violence, and every instinct was screaming that this was about to escalate beyond words. 6 against 1, Marcus said quietly. "Those don't seem like very good odds." "For you, maybe," Chad said, cracking his knuckles. "But we're not looking for a fair fight. We're looking to send a message." "What message is that?" "That some people belong here, and others don't. That when you step out of line, there are consequences. And that accidents can happen to anyone." The mention of accidents made Marcus's blood run cold. They weren't just threatening him. They were threatening to do to him what they had done to David. "You hurt that kid," Marcus said, his voice carrying a new steel. "We didn't hurt anyone," Preston said. "David had an accident, just like you're about to have an accident." That was when Marcus saw Emma in the distance, her camera trained on the group. She was far enough away to be safe, but close enough to document whatever was about to happen. And in that moment, Marcus made his decision. "I'm not David," he said, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. "And I'm not going to be your victim. This is about to get intense. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because stories like this one show us what real strength looks like. What's your prediction for how this ends? Drop it in the comments below." Preston's smile turned predatory. "We'll see about that." The attack came from multiple directions at once. Chad rushed forward while 2 others tried to flank Marcus from the sides. But Marcus had been training for scenarios like this since he was a child. As Chad's hands reached for him, Marcus stepped offline, using the bigger boy's momentum against him. What happened next was a display of technical precision that took less than 10 seconds but changed everything. Marcus's movements were fluid, controlled, each technique flowing into the next with the kind of efficiency that came from years of dedicated practice. Chad found himself on the ground, his arm trapped in a submission hold that made resistance impossible. The 2 flanking attackers hesitated, suddenly unsure as they saw their friend immobilized with minimal effort. "Let him go," Preston demanded, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "I will," Marcus said calmly, maintaining the hold. "As soon as you all back away." "You think you're tough now?" Preston snarled. "Wait until my father hears about this. Wait until the school board finds out what you've done." Marcus looked up at him, his expression calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "What I've done? I've defended myself against a group attack, and unlike what you did to David, there are witnesses." That's when Preston noticed Emma with her camera, and his face went pale. "Turn that thing off," he demanded. "I don't think so," Emma replied, her voice steady as she continued filming. "This is exactly the kind of documentation we need." Marcus released Chad, who scrambled away holding his arm. The group had lost its coordination, its members looking uncertainly between Preston and Marcus. "This isn't over," Preston said, but he was already backing away. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied. "It's been over for a long time. You just didn't know it yet." As Preston and his friends retreated, Marcus felt a profound shift in his perspective. He had spent months trying to avoid this confrontation, but now that it had happened, he realized that the fear had been worse than the reality. He had the skills to protect himself, and more importantly, he had the courage to use them when necessary. Emma approached, her camera still recording. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus said, checking his uniform for damage. "But more importantly, did you get it all?" "Every second," Emma confirmed. "And it's going to be enough. Combined with the David Chen footage and the evidence Mr. Washington helped us gather, This is going to expose everything. What happens now? Now we make sure the truth comes out. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe, because when Preston realizes what this means, he's going to try to escalate things even further. That evening, Marcus met with Emma, Mr. Rivera, and Mr. Washington in the basement gymnasium. The space had been cleaned and reorganized, but it felt different now. It felt like a war room. The video is powerful, Mr. Rivera said, reviewing the footage on Emma's camera. But it's just the beginning. We need to think strategically about how to release this information. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean, Mr. Washington said, that Preston's family has resources. Money, connections, influence. If we don't handle this right, they'll find a way to spin it, to make you look like the aggressor. Emma nodded. That's why we need to release everything at once. The David Chen footage, the documentation of the harassment pattern, the evidence of institutional cover-up, and today's video. Make it too big and too comprehensive to ignore or dismiss. And we need to make sure it goes to the right people, Mr. Rivera added. Not just the local authorities, but the media, the state education department, the civil rights organizations. Marcus looked around at his allies, these people who had chosen to stand with him when the institutions that were supposed to protect him had failed. What if it backfires? What if they find a way to turn this around? Then we'll face that when it comes, Mr. Washington said. But right now, we have something they don't expect. We have the truth, and we have evidence. Most importantly, we have you, someone who stood up when it mattered. The question is, Emma said, are you ready to see this through to the end? Because once we release this information, there's no going back. Marcus thought about David Chen in the hospital, about all the other students who had been pushed out of Whitmore over the years, about his mother's sacrifices and his own dreams. He thought about the scared boy who had walked into this school months ago, and the person he had become. I'm ready, he said. Let's do this. The next morning, Marcus woke up to find his story trending on social media. Emma had worked through the night, carefully editing the footage and evidence into a comprehensive timeline that told the complete story of harassment, institutional failure, and systemic cover-up at Whitmore Preparatory Academy. The video began with David Chen's accident, showing the clear contradiction between the official story and the evidence. It then detailed the pattern of harassment Marcus had endured, culminating in the parking lot confrontation where 6 students had attacked him and he had defended himself with minimal force. But what made the story truly powerful was the documentation of institutional complicity. Emma had obtained records showing that complaints against Preston and his friends had been filed and ignored for years. Students had been quietly transferred or pushed out rather than protected, and faculty members had been instructed to avoid intervening in what administrators called social adjustment issues. Marcus's phone buzzed constantly as the story spread. News outlets were picking it up, civil rights organizations were calling for investigations, and students from other schools were sharing their own stories of harassment and institutional failure. He was getting ready for school when his mother called. "Baby," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I just saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. Better than fine, actually. I'm so proud of you," she said, "for standing up, for protecting yourself, for doing the right thing even when it was hard." "I learned from the best," Marcus replied. "You taught me that sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when the system is against you." "The news is saying there might be legal consequences for those boys." "There should be," Marcus said. "What they did to David, what they tried to do to me, it's criminal, and the school's cover-up makes them complicit." When Marcus arrived at Whitmore that morning, he found a dramatically different environment. News vans lined the street outside the school, reporters interviewing students and parents. Police cars were parked in the administrative lot, and serious-looking people in suits were entering the main building. Emma met him at his locker, which had been cleaned and repaired overnight. "The district sent investigators," she said, "and the state attorney general's office is opening a civil rights inquiry. What about Preston and his friends? They're not here today. Word is their families pulled them out temporarily while their lawyers figure out how to handle this." Marcus felt a mixture of relief and vindication. For months he had felt isolated and under siege. Now, for the first time, the system was responding appropriately to the documented evidence of harassment and assault. "Mr. Williams?" A woman in a professional suit approached them. "I'm Detective Sarah Morrison with the district attorney's office. Could we speak privately?" Marcus looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll be right here," she said. Detective Morrison led Marcus to an empty classroom where another investigator was waiting. "First, I want to thank you for your courage in coming forward," she said. "The evidence you and Miss Chen have provided is extremely compelling." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we build a case," the second investigator said. "The video evidence clearly shows assault, and the documentation of institutional cover-up suggests a pattern of civil rights violations. We're looking at both criminal charges and federal intervention." "Criminal charges? Preston Blackwood and his associates attacked you," Detective Morrison explained. "That's assault. What they did to David Chen appears to be aggravated assault, and the evidence suggests this is part of a pattern of racially motivated harassment." Marcus felt the weight of the moment. "What do you need from me?" "We need you to testify about what you experienced. We need you to walk us through the harassment, the institutional failures, and the final confrontation." "Are you prepared to do that?" Marcus thought about David Chen in the hospital, about all the students who had been pushed out before him, about his mother's sacrifices and his own dreams. "Yes," he said, "I'm ready." The next few days brought a cascade of consequences that rippled far beyond Whitmore Preparatory Academy. The video had been viewed millions of times, sparking national conversations about privilege, institutional racism, and the failures of elite educational institutions. Preston, Chad, and their associates were arrested and charged with assault, conspiracy, and hate crimes. The evidence was overwhelming: video documentation, witness testimony, and a clear pattern of escalating harassment. Their families' wealth and connections, which had protected them for so long, now worked against them as the public scrutinized their attempts to avoid accountability. The school administration faced even more serious consequences. The principal was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. 3 board members resigned under pressure, and the state education department launched a comprehensive review of Whitmore's policies and practices. But the changes went deeper than just personnel. The investigation revealed systematic failures in how the school handled harassment complaints, disciplinary actions, and student safety. Federal investigators found evidence of discriminatory practices that violated civil rights laws, leading to a consent decree that would fundamentally reshape how the institution operated. Marcus found himself at the center of a media storm that felt surreal. Reporters wanted to interview him, civil rights leaders praised his courage, and other students from elite schools reached out to share their own stories of harassment and institutional failure. Through it all, he maintained the same disciplined approach that had served him in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He spoke truthfully but carefully, focusing on the facts rather than personal attacks. He let the evidence speak for itself. "You've become a symbol," Emma told him one afternoon as they sat in what was now officially designated as the school's self-defense training room. "Other students are inspired by what you did." "I just defended myself," Marcus said. "I used the skills I was taught and stood up for what was right." "That's exactly why it matters," came Mr. Washington's voice from the doorway. The custodian entered with his usual quiet dignity, but there was something different about his bearing. "You showed that having skills isn't enough. You have to have the courage to use them when it matters." "What's going to happen to Whitmore?" Marcus asked. "It's going to change," Mr. Washington said firmly. "Real change, not just cosmetic adjustments. The federal oversight will ensure that. But more importantly, the culture is going to change because students like you showed that the old ways won't be tolerated anymore." Mr. Rivera joined them, carrying news from the outside world. "The charges are sticking," he said. "Preston and his friends are looking at serious jail time, especially for what they did to David. Their lawyers are trying to negotiate plea deals, but the evidence is too strong." "How's David doing?" Marcus asked. "Better," Emma said. "His arm is healing and the concussion symptoms are improving. His family is grateful that the truth came out. They were being pressured to accept the accident story and not ask questions." Marcus felt a profound sense of vindication, but also responsibility. What about the other students who were pushed out over the years? The ones who didn't have video evidence? "That's part of the ongoing investigation," Mr. Rivera explained. "The federal inquiry is looking at patterns going back years. Some of those students may have legal recourse now that the cover-up has been exposed." 3 weeks after the video went viral, Marcus was called to testify before a federal grand jury investigating civil rights violations at Whitmore. He walked into the courthouse wearing his best suit, accompanied by his mother and a civil rights lawyer who had volunteered to represent him. The questioning was thorough but respectful. Marcus recounted the months of harassment, the institutional failures, and the final confrontation. He described how he had tried to handle the situation through official channels, only to be ignored or dismissed. "Mr. Williams," the prosecutor asked, "when you defended yourself against 6 attackers, did you use more force than necessary?" "No," Marcus replied clearly. "I used exactly the amount of force needed to protect myself, and no more. My training taught me to control situations, not to escalate them." "And how do you feel about the attention this case has received?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I feel grateful that the truth came out, but I also feel sad that it took a viral video for people to pay attention to something that had been happening for years." When the testimony concluded, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had told his story completely and truthfully. Now it was up to the system to deliver justice. The grand jury returned indictments against Preston and his associates for federal civil rights violations in addition to the state assault charges. The evidence was so compelling that their lawyers advised them to accept plea agreements rather than risk trial. Preston Blackwood III pleaded guilty to assault and civil rights violations, receiving a sentence of 2 years in federal prison, plus community service and mandatory counseling. His associates received similar sentences proportional to their involvement. The institutional consequences were equally significant. Whitmore Preparatory Academy was placed under federal oversight, with court-appointed monitors ensuring compliance with new anti-harassment policies. The school was required to implement comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs, mandatory bias training for all staff, and transparent reporting mechanisms for complaints. Most importantly, the school established a victim compensation fund for students who had been harmed by the previous culture of harassment and cover-up. David Chen's family was among the first to receive compensation for his medical expenses and trauma. But the changes went beyond Whitmore. The case sparked policy changes at elite schools nationwide, with many institutions voluntarily implementing stronger anti-harassment measures rather than risk federal intervention. Marcus became a sought-after speaker at schools and conferences, sharing his story and advocating for student safety and institutional accountability. He always emphasized the same themes: the importance of preparation, the courage to stand up for what's right, and the power of truth when supported by evidence. 6 months after the video went viral, Marcus stood at his graduation ceremony as valedictorian of his class. His mother sat in the front row, tears of pride streaming down her face. Emma sat nearby, her camera capturing the moment when the young man who had been targeted for harassment became the student honored for academic excellence and moral courage. In his valedictorian speech, Marcus spoke about the journey that had brought him to this moment. "When I first arrived at Whitmore," he said, "I thought success meant keeping my head down and avoiding trouble. I learned that real success means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." He looked out at the audience, seeing faces that had become familiar over the months of change and growth. "I also learned that individual courage is important, but systemic change requires collective action. It takes people willing to document the truth, to support those who are targeted, and to demand accountability from institutions. The skills I learned in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu taught me about discipline, control, and the difference between strength and violence. But the most important lesson was that true strength comes from protecting others, not from dominating them." As Marcus accepted his diploma, he reflected on how much had changed since that first day when Preston had shoved him in the hallway. The scared scholarship student had become a confident young man who understood his own worth and power. After the ceremony, he was approached by Professor Santos, his longtime BJJ instructor, who had driven hours to attend the graduation. "I'm proud of you," Professor Santos said, embracing his former student. "You represented our art with honor. You showed the world what real martial arts looks like." "I just did what you taught me," Marcus replied. "I stayed true to the principles." "That's exactly right," Professor Santos said. "The techniques are just tools. The principles are what make us who we are." Emma joined them, her camera finally put away for the day. "So what's next?" she asked. "Harvard in the fall?" Marcus nodded. "Harvard Law. I want to study civil rights law. What happened here showed me that the system can change, but it takes people willing to fight for justice through proper channels." "And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?" "Always," Marcus said with a smile. "I've already found a gym near campus. Professor Santos says I'm ready to start competing at the adult level." "Just remember," Professor Santos said, "competition is about testing yourself, not about defeating others. The same principle applies to everything you do in life. As the graduates and their families dispersed into the evening, Marcus took one last look at Whitmore Preparatory Academy. The Gothic buildings looked the same, but everything had changed. New policies were in place, new leadership was committed to inclusion and safety, and new students would never have to endure what he had experienced. Mr. Washington approached, still in his custodian's uniform, but moving with the dignity of someone who had played a crucial role in historic change. 32 years I've been watching students walk through these halls, he said. I've seen a lot of graduations, but this one feels different. Different how? Marcus asked. Different because for the first time I feel like the institution lived up to its promises instead of just talking about them. And that happened because you had the courage to demand better. We all demanded better, Marcus corrected. You, Emma, Mr. Rivera, my mother, Professor Santos. It took all of us. Mr. Washington smiled. That's the final lesson, isn't it? Real change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when good people decide to stand together. As Marcus walked toward his mother's car, he felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with harassment and fear had ended with justice and transformation. He had used his skills not for revenge or domination, but for protection and positive change. His phone buzzed with a text message from David Chen, who was now fully recovered and thriving at a new school. Saw your speech online. Thank you for making sure the truth came out. You're a hero. Marcus typed back. We're all heroes when we stand up for what's right. Thank you for your courage, too. The drive home was quiet, mother and son both processing the magnitude of what had been accomplished. As they pulled into their driveway in their modest neighborhood, Marcus's mother finally spoke. I know this year was hard, she said. Harder than anything I ever wanted you to go through, but I'm grateful for how it shaped you into the man you've become. It taught me that preparation meets opportunity, Marcus replied. All those years of training, all your sacrifices, they prepared me for this moment, and when the opportunity came to make a difference, I was ready. What are you most proud of? She asked. Marcus thought for a moment. I'm proud that I never lost sight of who I am. I could have let the harassment make me bitter, or let the victory make me arrogant, but I stayed true to the principles you and Professor Santos taught me. That night, as Marcus packed for his summer internship at a civil rights law firm, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The scared scholarship student who had walked into Whitmore months ago felt like a different person, but the core values remained the same. He pulled out his BJJ notebook, the same one Preston had knocked from his hands on that first day. The pages were still crumpled from the incident, but the techniques inside remained clear and precise. He had filled several more notebooks since then, documenting not just physical techniques but also the lessons about courage, justice, and institutional change. On the final page he wrote, "Real strength isn't about defeating others. It's about standing up for what's right, protecting those who can't protect themselves, and having the courage to demand accountability from systems that fail their responsibilities. The techniques are just tools. The principles are what make us who we are." A year later, Marcus would return to Whitmore as a guest speaker for incoming students. The school would be transformed, with diverse leadership, comprehensive anti-harassment policies, and a culture that celebrated difference rather than punishing it. He would stand in the same hallway where Preston had first confronted him, but now it would be filled with students of all backgrounds learning together in an environment of mutual respect and safety. The bullies who had tried to break him were serving their sentences and facing the long-term consequences of their actions. The system that had protected them had been dismantled and rebuilt with transparency and accountability. But most importantly, other students across the country had been inspired by his example to stand up against harassment and demand better from their institutions. The viral video had become a catalyst for change that extended far beyond one school or one community. Marcus's story showed that sometimes the most profound victories come not from avoiding conflict, but from having the preparation, courage, and principles to face it when it finds you. His Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training had given him the physical tools to protect himself, but his character had given him the moral tools to protect others and transform systems. As he prepared to begin his legal career, Marcus carried with him the lessons of discipline, restraint, and strategic thinking that had served him so well. He understood that the fight for justice was a lifelong commitment, requiring the same dedication and continuous improvement that had made him a skilled martial artist. The scared scholarship student had become a confident advocate for change, ready to use his skills and platform to ensure that other students would never have to endure what he had experienced. And in doing so, he had proven that real strength comes not from dominating others, but from lifting them up and demanding that institutions live up to their highest ideals. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.